In western China, entire villages still sit hours from the nearest paved road, hidden deep inside mountains most travelers never even see. Tourists crowd Beijing, Shanghai, and the Great Wall, but far beyond the cities, there are stone villages carved into cliffs, forests that swallow roads whole, and landscapes so strange they look unreal. This journey goes past the guidebooks and into the parts of China that feel forgotten, because the deeper this road goes, the harder it gets to understand how anyone still lives out there, and what is waiting at the very end makes the rest of the country feel close and modern by comparison. Most people think China is just about its cities and highways, but what happens when the highways disappear? About 6 hours west of Chongqing, the wide concrete highways slowly narrow until they become 2-lane roads. Then gravel, and eventually nothing more than packed dirt. The route pushes straight into the Wuling Mountains, where the ridges rise so tightly together that the sun disappears behind them by late afternoon. Phone service drops without warning, and streetlights vanish completely, leaving long stretches of road lit only by headlights. The land around the Wu River is cut into deep gorges and steep cliffs, forcing the road to twist back and forth for hours, just to cover a short distance. Every few kilometers, a single farmhouse appears beside the valley wall with smoke curling from the chimney. But there are no stores, no stations, and no signs pointing to the next town. From above, the entire region looks fractured, as if the earth had cracked open into layers of stone and water. And inside those narrow valleys along the river, small communities still live quietly between the cliffs, almost impossible to see unless you know exactly where to look. But even those mountains are not the strangest part of the journey. Further south, the landscape changes so suddenly that it no longer looks like normal mountains at all. In Guizhou, the hills collapse into a maze of stone towers, formed by ancient limestone that has been slowly eaten away by rain for millions of years. Instead of wide slopes and open valleys, the ground rises straight up into thin rock pillars that stand shoulder to shoulder, sometimes hundreds of meters tall, like a forest made of stone. Areas near the Libo karst and the Gujo River scenic area are filled with sinkholes, caves, and narrow gorges where the road has no choice but to twist and loop back on itself for hours. Driving through it feels slow and disorientating because every turn reveals another wall of rock blocking the way forward. Some villages sit so deep inside these valleys that direct sunlight only reaches them for a short time each day, and from above they are almost impossible to see, hidden beneath cliffs and thick trees. From ground level, every direction looks the same, and it becomes difficult to tell whether the road is leading somewhere new or simply circling deeper into the mountains. The further the journey continues, the more the landscape feels less like open countryside and more like a natural maze. Then, without warning, the road bends around one last cliff and stops at a small settlement built directly against the rock wall. where stone houses seem to grow out of the mountain itself, as if the village had been carved from the cliff instead of built on it. How does an entire town survive in a place where there is barely enough flat ground to build a single house? Places like Zhaoxing village sit quietly between steep cliffs in the mountains of Guizhou, hidden so deep in the valley that the settlement is almost invisible until the road drops directly into it. The village is built from dark timber and stone, and tall wooden drum towers rise above the rooftops, their layered eaves standing out against the surrounding green hills. Narrow footbridges cross the river that runs through the centre of the town. And during the rainy season, the water often swells high enough to touch the lowest steps. There are no apartment blocks or shopping centres here, and there are no glass buildings reflecting the sky. Instead, there are wooden homes, small courtyards, rice terraces carved into the slopes, and thin trails of smoke drifting upward from cooking fires in the early evening. Many families have lived in this same valley for generations, long enough that grandparents, parents, and children all share the same fields and the same paths. Children walk along stone steps and dirt trails to reach school each morning, and most supplies still arrive by small motorbikes or handcarts because larger vehicles cannot pass through the narrow lanes. Life moves at a slower pace here, and the noise of cities feels very far away. As if time itself had decided not to rush this place. When the night finally falls, the entire valley goes dark at once, with no neon signs, no traffic glow, and no distant hum of highways, leaving only the sound of insects and a sky filled with stars that most cities forget even existed. But even those hidden villages still have roads that connect them to the outside world. So what happens in the places where the road simply ends? In the mountains of Yunnan, there are settlements perched so high above the valleys that vehicles cannot reach them at all. In areas near the Nujiang Canyon, the cliffs rise almost straight up from the river, and the only way to reach some homes is by climbing long stone staircases carved directly into the rock. These steps can stretch for hundreds of meters, forcing residents to carry food, water, and building supplies on their backs or with the help of mules. During the winter months, thick fog fills the canyon and swallows the slopes, and entire villages disappear behind a wall of white mist until they look abandoned from a distance. From below, the houses seem to hang in the air, and from above, they feel nearly impossible to reach. Terraced farms wrap around the mountainsides in tight layers. Each level carefully cut by hand so that every small patch of soil can grow rice or vegetables. Nothing is wasted here, and every field sits only a few steps away from a drop that falls hundreds of meters to the river below. Daily life depends on careful footing and steady hands, because the mountain leaves no room for mistakes. Standing on those narrow paths, it becomes clear that life here is not about beautiful views or quiet scenery, but about endurance, because one careless step is all it would take for the mountain to take everything back. And just when the cliffs begin to thin out, the landscape changes again, This time the mountains are covered not in rock, but in forest so thick that it hides everything inside. Near Shennongjia, ancient forests cover entire mountain ranges and form one of the largest protected wilderness areas in central China. Some of these trees have been standing for hundreds of years, and their branches grow so tightly together that sunlight barely reaches the ground. The road winds through the forest like a narrow tunnel, and even at midday the air feels cool and dim, as if the sun never fully rises. This region is home to rare wildlife that has disappeared from much of the rest of the country. Golden snub-nosed monkeys move through the canopy in small groups. Asiatic black bears roam the slopes, and camera traps have even captured clouded leopards passing quietly through the trees at night. Because the forest is so large and so dense, sound does not travel far. Bird calls echo strangely. Leaves rustle without warning, and it becomes difficult to tell whether something is near or far away. Hikers who step too far from the road often lose their sense of direction within minutes, and rescue teams are called out every year to search for people who underestimated how easy it is to get turned around. The deeper the path goes, the more the outside world seems to disappear behind layers of green. After walking for a while, the only thing left to hear is the quiet rhythm of footsteps and distant animal calls. And the silence grows so complete that it feels like the forest has erased everything else beyond it. But nothing prepares travellers for what waits further north, because at some point the Green Mountains suddenly disappear, and the land turns dry and exposed. In Gansu, the colour of the earth changes from deep green to red and tan, and the mountains begin to look sunburned and worn down by centuries of wind. The rock layers fold and twist across the hillsides like frozen waves, and constant gusts scrape the surface into ridges and stripes that stretch for kilometres. This region marks the edge of the Gobi Desert, where forests disappear and rivers become rare, leaving behind wide valleys of stone, sand and dust. Towns grow smaller and farther apart, sometimes separated by hours of empty highway, and many homes are built low against cliffs or partially carved into the earth to block the wind and cold. Water often has to be delivered by truck. Summers are hot enough to crack the ground, and winters fall well below freezing. From a distance, the landscape looks empty, but scattered across the hills are the remains of old walls, watchtowers, and broken forts that once guarded the Hexi corridor, the same route traders used centuries ago when this was part of the Silk Road. These ruins stand alone in the desert, slowly being buried by sand, and with no towns left around them and no clear sign of when people finally moved on. Some of those settlements now sit completely hollow, with doors hanging open and roofs collapsing inward, as if the desert simply waited for everyone to leave and then quietly reclaim the land. After forests, cliffs, stone towers, and desert, one question still remains. Where is the most isolated place of all? Further west, the paved roads grow narrower and rougher until they fade into dirt tracks and eventually disappear altogether. Across Qinghai, the land opens into the high plains of the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau, where mountains stretch for hundreds of kilometers and towns become extremely rare. Snow lingers on the peaks for most of the year, and the air is so thin that even simple movement feels slower and heavier. Truck drivers avoid some routes because the next gas station or repair shop could be hours away, and breakdowns here can quickly become dangerous. A small number of nomadic families still travel across these grasslands with yaks and sheep, setting up temporary camps and moving with the seasons instead of following roads or maps. There are no street names, no grids, and no clear boundaries. Only memory, weather, and instinct guiding the way forward. The silence feels wider than the sky. Up here, China no longer feels crowded or fast or modern. It feels ancient and open, like a place that existed long before highways and cities, and will continue long after them. The further the journey moves from the coast and the lights of the cities, the larger the country seems to grow, until it stops feeling like a nation at all, and starts to feel like the raw shape of the earth itself. Most people will never see this side of it.